Oral questions. Question orale. The honourable member for Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands and Rideau Lakes.
The Liberal Prime Minister has lost control of spending, and he's lost control of his own cabinet. The outgoing Finance Minister promised that a massive $40 billion deficit would be her fiscal guardrail, but it looks like the Prime Minister and the incoming Finance Minister, carbon tax Carney, are pushing her through the guardrail and over the fiscal cliff with the rest of Canadians. So will the Prime Minister stand up today and admit that he's having his outgoing Finance Minister take the fall so that he can replace her with carbon tax Carney?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
They are trying to distract from their voting record, Mr. Speaker. In this House of Commons, when this government put forward legislation, affirmed last night by the Senate, in fact, to cut GST for families looking to buy kids' clothes, diapers, car seats, families that want to go out to a restaurant, someone who wants to buy beer or cider. They're against that, Mr. Speaker.
Shameful.
Lots of slogans when it comes to cutting taxes, but that's all they have, Mr. Speaker. Empty slogans. When it comes down to it, we put a tax cut forward, and they voted against it.
Right on.
The honourable member for Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands, Rideau Lakes.
A tiny 2-month tax trick is not going to help the more than 2 million Canadians lined up at food banks every month, or pennies off of Pepsi for Canadians who are going to pay $800 more for groceries in 2025. So this Prime Minister is forcing his outgoing Finance Minister to take the fall for the effects of his inflationary spending that's pushing his $40 billion deficit guardrail right to past and over the cliff. So will the Prime Minister admit that it is, in fact, his inflationary spending that's the cause of this massive deficit?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to Minister of Housing.
The lowest debt and deficit in the G7, Mr. Speaker. A 5th consecutive interest rate decline. What is that? That is good news, Mr. Speaker, for business owners looking to expand. It's good news for mortgage holders looking to renew, families looking to buy a home, Mr. Speaker, and there's many other examples. They want to distract from their record. In fact, think about the Harper years. The worst rate of economic growth had Stephen Harper going back to R.B. Bennett in the 1930s, Mr. Speaker. They're not serious about these things.
The Honourable member for Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands, Rideau Lakes.
Good news. He's talking about good news like Canadians have never had it so good. The highest household debt because Canadians can't afford to pay their mortgages. They can't afford to feed themselves. They can't afford to heat their homes or put gas in their cars after 9 years of this NDP Liberal Prime Minister who said that the budget would balance itself, that he doesn't think about monetary policy, and it should be the bankers that worry about the economy. Even his caucus is calling for some fiscal sanity after 9 years of his economic vandalism. When the deficit smashes through $40 billion, will at least he allow his caucus to have a free...
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
He talks about people at food banks, Mr. Speaker. We're not insensitive to that. Canadians have had a hard time. What has this government done? We've supported them through the pandemic. We continue to show support, Mr. Speaker. They want to cut their pensions. They want to cut employment insurance. We have a school food program, in fact, that is supporting no less than 400,000 kids in 4 different provinces. They voted against that too, Mr. Speaker.
Shameful.
The Canada Child Benefit, today parents will see a direct deposit put into their account. Guess what? They're also against that, Mr. Speaker. They don't care.
Yes.
The Honourable Member for Mégantic-L'Érable. Deficit. That's a very short 3-syllable word. It's easy to pronounce, and yet not only are the Liberals incapable of saying it, they won't even talk about it because they've lost control, Mr. Speaker. The Minister of Finance said that she had put in place a guardrail so that the deficit would not go beyond $40 billion. So why is the Prime Minister being advised by Mark Carney? Why is he choosing to force her to blow through her $40 billion guardrail and break her promise? The Honourable Member. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Tomorrow, Canadians and Quebecers will have a GST holiday. That is great news. And what did the Conservatives say? They said that they had to cut taxes, but they sat down And tomorrow morning, we took action. We are going to give a GST holiday to Canadians on diapers, on restaurants. Mr. Speaker, Canadians will be able to save money because of us. The Conservatives don't get it. The Honourable Member for Mégantic-Lérable. I didn't hear him mention the word deficit, Mr. Speaker. I said deficit. It's not hard to understand. Why did the Prime Minister force the first female Minister of Finance to blow through her guardrail, taking with her all Canadians over the fiscal cliff, while he and his friend carbon tax Carney watched them fall? That is such hypocrisy from a Prime Minister who said this week, well, I want you to know that I am and always will be a feminist. I'm going to try again. Does the Prime Minister have the courage to say the word deficit? And why did he force his Minister of Finance to break her promise? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Mr. Speaker, I saw the Conservatives' economic statement, and it's blank. They have nothing to say about the economy. Early tomorrow morning, we're going to give a GST holiday to Canadians, and that's good news. They could have stood up and supported us on that. And what did they do? They stayed seated. So they are going to have to tell their constituents why they didn't support this holiday. And that is shameful, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
Honourable Member for Calgary Heritage.
$40 billion was a guardrail set by this Liberal finance minister. Listen to this. Not an unlimited pot. Need to show fiscal restraint. If we have $40 billion guardrail, stay in there. Mr. Speaker, that's not Stephen Harper. That's Liberal members of Parliament. If the deficit is over the $40 billion guardrail, will the Prime Minister allow free vote for his NDP Liberals?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Housing and Communities.
The members opposite are very fond of quoting from the Parliamentary Budget Officer, Mr. Speaker, as is their right. Well, they can go one step further and actually look what he recently said on the country's finances. We have a more than sustainable fiscal situation. But if it was up to the Conservatives, that would reverse. We know what the Conservative record is when it comes to running up deficits. But more importantly, Mr. Speaker, to the point that's been raised because they talk about families, what programs would they cut? They talk about this idea of fixing the budget. For them, that means cutting. And they would cut dental care, they would cut pharmacare, they would cut support for families across the board, and pensions, Mr. Speaker. They're not serious.
That's right. The Honourable Member for Calgary Heritage.
Mr. Speaker, we're talking about what could be more than $40 billion. A carbon-taxing, coal-loving Carney, a finance minister on the run, a Prime Minister not into monetary policy. They hike taxes, they fuel inflation, they crash through the fiscal guardrails and off the cliff. This government is a chaotic clown show. Which one of them will call a carbon tax election?
Just to make sure everybody's, just watch the words that they use. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Once again, we see the Conservatives dive into insults because they actually have no plan for the economy. And I think they just can't stand the fact that we have a finance minister who was able to renegotiate NAFTA with the previous Trump administration. We were able to see supports being delivered to businesses and Canadians through the worst global pandemic. And, Mr. Speaker, we continue to see interest rates drop. And tomorrow we see a tax break for all Canadians. So while they want to know about a free vote, I'm wondering if they'll have a free question.
The Honourable Member for Lévis-Lotbinière. Mr. Speaker, this Prime Minister has lost control of his finances and of his cabinet. This spat is about the astronomical deficit because the Prime Minister is forcing his Finance Minister to increase the deficit by $6 billion for electioneering purposes. He forced her to not keep her promise, to not blow through her $40 billion deficit. Will the Prime Minister confirm that the deficit will not be beyond $56 billion? Thank you. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today in my riding, it is the distribution of Christmas baskets, and I'd like to thank all the volunteers and Solange, the General Director, for their excellent work. When I meet with them, they always remind me how important it is for families who receive the Canada Child Benefit and that is an excellent, it's some $7,000 per person, and we are so thankful for our Minister of Finance to have put that in place. Thank you. The Honourable Member for Lévis-Lauvignières. Mr. Speaker, the facts. 9 years of Liberal government, 9 consecutive deficits. The result, the debt of Canada has more than doubled. Even the Minister of Finance is starting to quarrel with the Prime Minister because of his irresponsibility. Mr. Speaker, to solve this spat, the Prime Minister is preparing to crown the very radical Mark Carney. He's been pulling the strings for far too long. So, is this Minister of Finance on her last legs? And will she replaced by Mark Carney, who is unelected?
Secretary.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to take this opportunity also to thank all the volunteers in my riding who are helping those who are in need, including and we have to say that, our Deputy Prime Minister has given us a GST tax break that the Conservatives voted against. I would urge my colleagues across the way to meet with their constituents and tell them that they voted against this tax relief measure for those people who are in need. Thank you.